My name is John Reist, CEO of New Brunswick Southwest Greens. Here in Southwest New Brunswick, we are facing a housing crisis resulting from the lack of quality and affordable rental housing. Not only does this cause issues for existing residents, it means that many of the otherwise thriving local businesses and industries struggle to attract and retain employees. Those on fixed and low income are having problems affording rent, food, power, and heat, and spending more than 30% of their income on housing expenses. Speaking tonight on, on the issues will be Paul Manley and David Coons, who have made housing an issue both provincially and federally. We will end this meeting with discussion and comments from those present on their concerns of housing in the area. I would like to welcome Paul Manley as Green MP. Paul has been an advocate of housing, homelessness, and guaranteed livable income. Paul?
I don't enjoy wearing them. I am the member for Nanaimo Ladysmith, the member of parliament for Nanaimo Ladysmith. I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of this Nanaimo First Nation, which is where the word Nanaimo comes from. It's not an English word at all, but it comes from the words Nanaimo. And my riding falls within the traditional territory of Snanawas, Snuneymuxw, Staminas, and Layaxon First Nations. They're all Hulkaminam speaking people. My riding is not unlike other ridings across the country. We face a housing affordability crisis here, and it's a crisis for Indigenous people on reserve. It's a crisis for Indigenous people living off reserve, as well as for people living on fixed income, so seniors, people with disabilities, low-income workers, low-wage workers, and many others. It's become a crisis here in the riding. It was one of the first things, it was the first question I asked in the House of Commons. I was elected in 2019. I ran in 2015, closest four-way race in Canada, or one of them, and was elected in a by-election in 2019. And it was the first question I brought up, and it was my first debate in the House of Commons. We here in Nanaimo, we're getting the after effects of what happened in Vancouver with money laundering in the use of residential real estate for money laundering and also for tax evasion. Canada had very loose rules. They've been tightened up somewhat for numbered companies not showing the beneficial ownership of the companies that were buying up residential real estate. We had money flowing through casinos here for years, and we've had crony capitalists from other countries that were trying to hide their wealth that they couldn't take out of those countries. So Russia, China, Iran, and a lot of money flowed in here from China in particular into residential real estate. And it drove the price up of housing in Vancouver, and that spread right through the lower mainland, the greater Vancouver area. And now it's come over to Vancouver Island, where I live. And people who can't afford housing in Vancouver ended up purchasing over here, or selling their houses in Vancouver, which, I think the average home price in Vancouver right now for a detached home is $1.4 million. And you can sell that house and come over here and buy a house for $500,000 or $600,000 and retire on the other million. We also have the largest per capita seniors over the age of 75. People come here to retire. So we've had an influx of a lot of folks that come here to retire. And then with COVID, people are trying to get out of their condos in downtown Vancouver and have moved over here, as well as snowbirds who can't go to Florida or Arizona or wherever else. So we have a very vacancy rate here in Nanaimo, and rents have skyrocketed. Rents have gone up in the last 5 years by 60%. Now, this is not an unusual story across Canada, and I'm the housing critic for the Green Party of Canada. And so I've been looking into what's been happening in other areas. And in Toronto, over a 10-year period, there was $25 billion worth of mortgages that went through unregistered mortgage providers, so that they didn't have to report those mortgages through FinTrack, which is what we have for looking at money laundering. So a lot of money flowed into the Toronto housing market as well. We've also seen in Toronto, just as an example, over 10 years, $28 billion was invested by large investment companies, and we have real estate investment trusts, as well as hedge funds and pension funds and corporations that have become very predatory in this country in terms of buying up affordable housing stock. And then where there are no rent controls, they just jack up the rent. And I understand in New Brunswick that is the situation. I've had information sent to me by Robert in Jenica Atwin's office about rents, people just getting 2 months notice or 3 months notice that their rent is going up 50, 80, 100%. In BC, we have rent controls, but we don't have vacancy controls. So you can evict somebody for doing a renovation, and what happens is they just update the building, they evict everybody, and then they jack up the rent to whatever they want. Vacancy controls control the amount of increase between tenants that landlords can have. So we have a patchwork of systems across Canada for rent and vacancy control. In Canada right now, 1.8 million Canadians are paying more than 30% of their income on rent. That's the affordability threshold. 800,000 of those are paying more than 50%. And there's an estimated 2.4 million Canadian households that are experiencing core housing need just in last year. The definition of affordable housing is 30% of your income, but what does that mean for a region? So when you define what is affordable for Vancouver, what is an affordable apartment in Vancouver? Is that based on the median income? Is it the lowest quartile? So we don't have an accurate definition, and that's something that I asked for. I brought forward a motion, motion 66, which I tabled in the House on February 4th, and it asked for a number of things to deal with some of these problems that we're facing, because the federal government has finally got back into the affordable housing game, I guess. They're back at it. The federal government got out of funding affordable housing in the 80s and 90s, and finally just cut themselves loose in 1993 and devolved everything down to the provinces. And in some cases, the provinces just have, passed on that responsibility to municipalities. In British Columbia, the responsibility for housing is with the province, and so we have BC Housing that deals with affordable housing, but the federal government completely got out of funding affordable housing and cooperative housing by 1993, and they're finally come back. They're signed on to, they have a new act, the National Housing Strategy Act, which actually recognizes that housing is a human right. And Canada is a state party to the United Nations Universal Declaration on the rights on human rights. And Article 25 of that declaration recognizes the right to housing as part of the right to an adequate standard of living. Canada has also ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and that's a UN human rights treaty that recognizes the right to everyone to an adequate standard of living for themselves and their family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing. And countries that have ratified this treaty are obliged to take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of this right. So the Liberal government, the government of Canada, brought in the National Housing Strategy, and the federal government has recognized that the right to housing in international law. So the federal government has both a right and a responsibility to set national standards to ensure that the provinces are in compliance with international law and the agreements that Canada is a state party to. And that's what motion 66 is basically saying. I'm asking for a number of things in that motion. Number one, that the government recognize that housing unaffordability and homelessness are twin national crises, that we need to redefine affordable housing using a better updated formula. We need to remove the tax exemptions for real estate investment trusts, which pay a marginal tax rate of 0.2% rather than corporate tax rates of 15%, unless they are using that tax exemption to protect affordable housing units. And we haven't been able to find any situations where that has happened. So they're using that tax status as a way to accumulate a lot of real estate, and then they're gentrifying buildings. And like some of the reports that I've read about what real estate investment trusts are doing in this country is absolutely abhorrent behavior. So they need to be regulated and regulated properly. The next ask is to do more to regulate foreign investment in residential real estate. You know, we have the Conservatives and the Liberals who brag about how open we are to foreign direct investment in this country. It has not helped in many, many situations. And residential real estate is one of those areas where we have predatory investment in real estate that is damaging to Canadians. It's not helpful to us at all. I'm asking for restrictive covenants on affordable housing units that are built with taxpayer subsidies to ensure that those housing units remain affordable. And right now, the federal government is putting money into building 6,000 units a year, but those houses can be taken out of the affordable housing market within 10 years and then pumped up to market rate. And I think that they should have a covenant on them to ensure that they remain affordable. I'd like to see the federal government create national standards to establish rent and vacancy controls, and this steps right into provincial territory. But if the provincial governments are not following through on what is international law, making sure that people have a right to housing, can actually have a place they can afford to live in, then the federal government has a role to play. And I want to see the federal government create an empty home tax for foreign and corporate residential property owners that leave buildings and units vacant. And this was a problem over in Vancouver. I'm sure it's a problem in other places where people would buy units, condominiums or houses, and just leave them empty. And it didn't matter whether they rented them out or not, because the price of real estate keeps on going up and up and up. But also, if you own a lot of residential real estate and you're renting it out, if you tighten the market by leaving some of those units empty, you drive up the price of housing because you've created more demand. And there's a film called Push, which has the former UN Special Rapporteur for affordable housing, the right to affordable housing, Leilani Farha, in it. And it's called Push, and I recommend people watch it. And this is a practice that's happening all over the world. You know, in hot real estate markets like London, these hedge funds come in and they buy up buildings, and pension funds, and they buy up buildings and they just leave them empty. They know that the price of real estate is going to go up, but it also increases the demand, and then they can charge more for rent. The other ask in my motion is to increase access to affordable properties for Canadians buying homes by regulating investors out of the market for residential real estate priced below the median regional value. So opening up real estate for home buyers, for low-income home buyers. What has happened since the financial crash actually is that in 2008 is that investors have come into the market to actually buy houses now too. And this happened, it was widespread across the United States, and it's happened in Canada. And I would like to see the federal government prioritize protecting the existing affordable housing stock by facilitating the purchase of that housing stock by nonprofit housing organizations and cooperatives, and then prioritizing funding for new builds to nonprofit and cooperative housing. And cooperative housing is a model that I love. These are communities that are created. People can age in place. If and live with families with young kids. If you lose your job, you don't lose your home, because your rent is based on your income. And so cooperatives are a really good model for creating community and stability in community. And that's where I'd like to see the federal government put their money. So this is the work that I've been doing in the House of Commons on this issue, and just looking at the situation across Canada. It's a real mess. It's a mess everywhere. And what I understand in New Brunswick is you're dealing with the same kind of situation we're dealing with right here on Vancouver Island. So thanks.
Thank you, Paul. We appreciate what you're doing in Ottawa, helping to make change. Now I would like to introduce David Kuhn, leader of the Green Party of New Brunswick and the MLA since 2014. David Kuhn has been vocal on the importance of housing in New Brunswick and has called on the government to be more ambitious and provide more affordable housing. Recently, David tabled a bill to protect tenants' rights and establish rental controls. David?
Well, thank you for all of your work and the work Jenica and Elizabeth do, the three of you in Ottawa, and for all of us. We're really pleased that you're there, doing such a great job for us in Ottawa. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I'm glad that you're doing it. Can't be easy. So I want to talk, well, just a little bit about a little history first of all. So we used to have NB Housing as an agency of government with its own minister, and some people will remember that. And that was eliminated, I guess, when McKenna was there as premier. And you might remember McKenna famously or infamously said the people first ended when the money ran out. And we really never have recovered from that much, have we? So he mostly got rid of NB Housing as an entity with a minister, and it's kind of a shell now with income assistance. But the thing about NB Housing at the time was it had a broad mandate for housing, to focus on not just the government public housing, but kind of to play a facilitating role for all kinds of housing, nonprofit housing and cooperative housing, like Paul was talking about. And it had a good grip on the situation in the different regions of our province, different counties, and it also saw some role in facilitating local community development through its own housing. So that was then. That was in the, I guess, up until the late 80s, early 90s. So we haven't had that kind of big picture look and commitment for housing, for affordable housing in New Brunswick since then. So it's really come down to, in my opinion, the need to take concrete community-based approaches to helping to bring about community housing. And we've got lots of experience with that in our history. I think of so many communities that got their own hospitals up and going. Graham and Ann, see Bradley Small there, for example. It was a community, and it's not the only one, who actually established the first hospital on the island. That happened in other communities around the province. And we're going to have to, I believe, sort of build on that proud history to bring about the kind of affordable housing we need in our communities. In Charlotte County and some of the extremities like Macadam and Harvey, from the study that was done by the Southwest Regional Services Commission, half of people renting are having a hard time of making a go of it, real hard time. And even people who own their own homes, about 20% of them are having a hard time. So there's other issues around that, of course, which we could talk about later if you want. But on the housing side, taking a community-based approach with building nonprofit housing, with building co-op housing, has tremendous potential. You take the profit motive out of it. You take more direct control over the housing, because in a co-op apartment, everyone's part of the co-op and has a say in how things are run. We've got a good nonprofit housing organization in New Brunswick that has members all over the province. Some of them are churches, some of them are local community groups, and so on, that has been building co-ops and nonprofit housing around the province. Now, a good example of that in St. John it's called Housing Alternatives. They've been around for a while. So they're a nonprofit, and for anyone who's interested in sort of pursuing this, they've got lots of experience in both developing affordable housing as a nonprofit, and also more recently they got involved in buying or acquiring old houses with the help of the city of St. John. So there's a role for the municipalities here, and renovating them into affordable housing, upgrading them, making them safe, and so on. So they're picking up old places that are run down and not up to code, and getting them into shape and turning them into affordable housing. So there's some good models around. In Woodstock, they've got a nice co-op housing example. I visited it. People seem to like living there, and it's real nice, kind of townhouses with the way they have it set up there. So it then looks, I think it's important to look at the, who around might be interested in getting involved in this. Municipalities definitely have a role to play. Sometimes they have land. Sometimes they've acquired buildings that they didn't really want to hold on to because they were dilapidated or whatever, or were seized for what have you. So municipalities have a role to play. Municipalities have a role to play too. They can in helping to provide land for housing development. And then, of course, I think of, like in St. Stephen, you've got people, local people who've developed apartments and have some real experience to share around that. Well, except Gerald Ingersoll, he's from Grand Manan, but he's local enough, I guess. Now he's been on the mainland for a long time, and I guess that building he worked on is open now. So there's people around who've had direct experience, who are local, that could be called on potentially to help in how to pursue this. In the bigger centers like Fredericton, Toronto, not that big. Fredericton, Moncton, and Moncton's almost like Toronto now. It's booming. And St. John, the government keeps saying, well, we're not going to get involved in this because we think the market should prevail. Well, the market is eliminating any form of affordable housing you can imagine. And it's in those cities, it's heading to upscale, expensive apartments with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Who needs 2 bathrooms in a 2-bedroom apartment? But that's what you've got. Plus bathtubs you can't climb into because the walls are so high. But that's the fashion now. So My mother was in one of those, and she had a dickens of a time using the bath. We were going to try and break it open for her, but anyway, she ended up moving out of it. So there's some real interesting potential there. And the other thing in Charlotte County that there is that would be interesting to bring in on the discussion is the Fundy Community Foundation. So the Fundy Community Foundation, well, you know, it hasn't been involved in housing or land particularly, but it's got a pretty broad mandate. It doesn't mean that it couldn't play a role in say receiving funds, being able to issue tax receipts for an organization or group of people who wanted to move a nonprofit initiative forward. There's lots of money in Ottawa to support this right now, as Paul was saying. The province is a bit of a problem right now because since last summer, they said we're not going to put any money into nonprofit housing or co-op housing that's receiving money from Ottawa. Because why? Because they have this agreement that Paul mentioned with Ottawa that's providing funding for supposedly for affordable housing in New Brunswick. And they've got targets. So for 3 years, they want to build 151 or support the building of 151 affordable units across the province, which isn't very many for 3 years worth of work. But they're not allowed to count units they support that are receiving federal funding. So if you're Housing Alternatives in St. John and you got money from the federal government through CMHC to do a project, the province would say, we're not going to throw in like we used to because we can't count those units against our target. Anyway, it's really quite a miserable position they're taking because they don't want to spend any more money than what they have to spend under the agreement. So that's a political problem, and I'm on it. See how far I get. But I need your support on that for sure, to argue that the provincial government needs to be budgeting money beyond the small amount that they're budgeting for new units under the federal provincial agreement. Most of that money under the federal provincial agreement, I might mention, is going to things that the province should be spending their own money on, and that's renovating, upgrading, maintaining the MB housing units, the public housing in the province. That's something we should be paying for out of our own funds. But to me, all the money from Ottawa and the agreement with them should be going into actually creating new housing. You know, if you've got a good roof over your head, as a friend of mine likes to say, and food on your table, and someone who loves you, you got it made pretty much. And if you don't have a roof over your head, that's good. You got real trouble. And so lots of people have real trouble right now. So the other little thing I wanted to touch on was not apartments, but people's homes. So we know in Charlotte County, based on this report that was done, at least 20% of people who live in their own homes are really struggling with their costs. There is two programs the provincial government has, one to help with home repairs, and the other to help get your energy costs down, your heating costs, to help upgrade insulation, windows, and so on, maybe replace an old rattly oil furnace with a heat pump or something better. So they're decent programs, but each of them have their own problems. The provincial home repair program sets an income threshold which is way too low. A lot of people can't afford to put a roof over their, put a new roof on their house, but they earn too much to qualify for this program. I know of seniors who are basically facing the choice of, if they can't qualify for that program because their pension is such, to put a new roof on their house, they're gonna have to go into a nursing home. That's the only other thing they could afford to do. So the threshold on that, the income cutoff needs to be increased. So so that it actually meets the needs that people have who have a modest income in terms of keeping their houses up and being able to stay in them. The other one, the low energy, the retrofit program, is a good program. Anyone who's used it has found, on average, it's saved them about 30%, cut their heating costs by about a third, which is pretty good, and also made their house more comfortable and well, like I found when I updated our farmhouse in Wawig some years back there, cut down on the mice quite a bit, which was a bonus. So that's a good program, but its problem is the waiting list is 2 or 3 years long now for it. They only fund it at the bare minimum, and that's kind of the story these days with the provincial government, is they do the bare minimum, and so very few people a year are able to take advantage of that program. So I've been pushing for it to be better funded, so that more people in a year can benefit from it. The benefits are tremendous. Of course, more comfortable house, healthier when it's warmer, not so drafty, less expensive to live in. So you've got money otherwise that you can in your pocket that otherwise was going out the uninsulated walls or out the crappy windows, and also, of course, it's helping to shrink our overall carbon footprint, which is a good thing too. So those are a couple of things that are decent that social development has, but need to be improved. And they're not designed particularly for people on income assistance. They're based on an income test, overall income test. But as I said, the income level is a bit too low right now, needs to be raised. And there is, I think, a little bit of a, what do you call it, stigma attached to it. People tend to think, oh, it's for people on income assistance. But I've always told people, no, this is just if you're, if you've got a modest income, this is there to help you. So I've talked to seniors about that, and my own mother-in-law in the past. And sometimes it's a hard barrier to break. People proud, and they don't want to take advantage of something that's not, they don't think is right. But this is something that makes a lot of sense and can really help people who could benefit from it. But it's just not funded enough. So that's something else I've been working on. On the rental side, the last thing I'll say is this isn't really about, it's sort of about affordability, I guess. True. But in New Brunswick, tenants have very few rights compared to most other provinces. And so a couple of years ago, I submitted a bill to the legislature where we drew from some of the best examples in other provinces of how they were protecting tenants there, from evictions, from rent increases, from a whole variety of things. And my battery is running low. Hold on. Okay. And so what was interesting to me about that was the big developers lost their minds because of that bill I tabled. Apparently they think the Greens in the legislature have a tremendous amount of power, because they mounted a huge lobby, targeted all the MLAs, targeted the government to kill the bill. And they were just beside themselves, particularly over the suggestion that we might set an ability to control how much the rent increases might be, but over some of the other things too. It ended up dying because of the snap election, so I was never able to get it out of first reading. But I have brought a bill back that's kind of a smaller version of it that is really focused specifically on rent controls because of what's been happening with unacceptable increases in rent that so many people are experiencing all around the province. So anyway, I've talked long enough. But that's those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you this evening.
Thank you, David. Southwest New Brunswick is facing a unique housing crisis. The Southwest Service Commission recently released a housing report for the region outlining needs and gaps and other detailed information on housing in Southwest New Brunswick. I would ask Alexander Jopin, could you explain the findings of this study?
Thanks, John, and thanks so much, David and Paul, for giving your perspectives and doing the work you're doing to get more affordable housing. I didn't exactly expect to be speaking tonight, so I don't have anything prepared or anything like that. But I did work on this study, and I'll just give some high-level overviews, and I do have some questions. So it's okay to ask questions. I'll do that as well. So. We found very, very low vacancy rates in most of our municipalities. St. Stephen has a vacancy rate of 0.3%. Ideally, you want 3 to 5%. And I think as was gone through, Paul did a very good job of explaining what happens when you have low vacancy rates. We also saw the level of maintenance of homes that people are living in is quite low, and in some cases, I would go as far as saying you're going to have public health and safety issues down the line, if not immediately because of that. And I guess what's sort of relevant for tonight, and I guess what John was talking about is with developers is we do have developers in the region, and David mentioned a few of them, and they do want to be part of the solution from what I've seen, but they need a little bit of extra help, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this study was as a developer, when you're getting ready to undertake a big housing project, just like most people when you're buying a house, you go to the bank for financing, and we're seen as a riskier investment in our region because we're rural and we don't have data. So it's you want to be able to go to the bank and say, hey, we know what the vacancy rate is. Obviously there's a market for this, and these units will be absorbed into the market. And then the bank says, oh, we can see, here's the data, great, looks good. Here's your low interest rate. Well, we don't have that data, or we haven't had that data in our region. So our developers have really struggled with that. So that was kind of the main reason why we undertook this study, was to be able to provide that data. And we also, we wanted to help people access CMHC funding. And I don't know if CMHC has been named directly tonight, but I think Paul was speaking about it with the National Housing Strategy. CMHC is a federal body that kind of administrates, at least from my knowledge, they administer the housing portfolio for the federal government. And it looks like they have great programs, and it is true that the federal government is back in the housing game, and they've been providing subsidies and grants and loans with good interest rates for affordable housing projects. And I'd be really interested to hear Paul's perspective on this as a federal representative. It seems like rural areas are really at a disadvantage because we don't get that data directly from CMHC and StatsCan like larger municipalities and metro areas do. And B, our developers are usually family businesses. They're not the REITs, those real estate investment trusts that have hundreds of people on staff, planners, economists that can do all that work. So I'd be really interested to hear from Paul what your perspective on the rural, how CMHC addresses rural housing, and if you think they're doing enough, if you think they can do more. Personally, I would like to see some targeted rural programs and some acknowledgement that rural housing challenges exist and are different from urban housing challenges. Thankfully, we don't have, I don't think, the kind of money laundering that I know is happening in cities happening here in Southwest New Brunswick. Our real estate market just isn't that hot, but we do have lots of other affordable housing issues. So I don't know if this is question period yet, but if we get there for Paul, I'd love to hear this perspective on CMHC and rural, what they can do for rural communities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Xander. Paul, you went and told me that you might have to leave at 8 o'clock. Would you like to comment on Xander's question?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer a few questions if people have them. I can't really speak to the situation in New Brunswick, the rural situation there. My riding has, Nanaimo, Ladysmith, it's got a few small communities. So Ladysmith has maybe 10,000 people in it now. Nanaimo is a city of 100,000 people. And I know that CMHC is helping with some funding for projects in Ladysmith and in other areas around my riding. We have a different situation here because we have BC Housing, which partners with CMHC. So we don't have the kind of separation that David was talking about, with New Brunswick Housing, with the provincial government and the federal government. Here they actually work together, and a lot of CMHC money actually just flows into BC Housing, and then they work on the projects. But they've changed the model a little bit so that people can apply directly to CMHC. So a lot of the affordable housing organizations are putting in applications, and there's different pools of money through CMHC for housing. There are a number of different initiatives for CMHC. So there's the rental construction financing that some of the small rural developers can apply for. That's the one that I was saying that the affordability requirement only needs to be maintained for 10 years. There's the National Housing Co-Investment Fund for new construction. That one, they have to actually maintain affordable housing for 20 years to be part of that. And there's, for these ones, there's community and affordable housing projects, organizations that can apply, municipalities can apply for these funds. So it's open to municipalities, provinces and territories, Indigenous governance and organizations, the private sector, community housing providers. The rental one is for private construction. And there's a number of different streams that they have through the National Housing Strategy. And they just had the rapid housing initiative, which was kind of emergency funding to get out the door before March 31st this year. And they had $500 million for large cities. I think 16 largest cities in Canada could apply for that fund. And then another $500 million, which was available for small communities and housing providers. And that one was way oversubscribed. So $500 million, they had more than 670 applications, and applications for $4.2 billion. So almost 9 times the amount of funding available was applied for. And in my conversations with government ministers and parliamentary secretaries, there is more money that's going to be flowing into that. There's just such a need across Canada for affordable housing right now. And again, it's the problem with some of this. Not all real estate investment trusts are engaged in predatory behavior, but some of them are. And the largest one, Cap REIT, is flipping some 14,000 units in a year from affordable to market rate housing. And they're buying up in neighborhoods that they'll buy a building that's working class
Yes.
in a neighborhood that's on the edge of gentrification, and they'll just work on evicting people to be able to jack up the rents in those places. And in some other locations, like in the north, it's really out of control. I had a lengthy report that I've got it at my other office, so I had highlighted a number of points in it. But one REIT, the NP REIT in Yellowknife, it blacklists people for rentals. It prioritizes rentals for the government and for their resource industries. And so you have a situation where, you know, in some of these northern communities, it's a 17% homelessness rate. That's, you know, 17% of the population is homeless. And these buildings that, you know, 75% of the housing of the apartments in Yellowknife are owned by one REIT, 75%. And so they control the housing market. They prioritize government and industrial clients for people coming up north to live, and the locals can't find a place to live. And so that's a, you know, that's a predatory practice that needs to stop. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about in terms of regulation of the housing market, where we have disparate sets of rules across the country, and it's leaving people falling through the cracks, and people are dying. People are dying in homeless situations. I just posted an article from about a situation in Sioux Lookout. My sister used to be an Ontario provincial police officer. She's Indigenous, and she was involved in Aboriginal policing in northwestern Ontario with the Northwest Patrol. In 1997, I was working on a documentary about human rights workers in Guatemala. And I went to the Guatemala city dump because that's where the death squads were taking people after they tortured them and murdered them, and they would leave them at the dump. And in that dump, there was a community that lived there that had built their homes from stuff that they found. And as the garbage trucks emptied, people would scramble up the garbage piles to grab what they could to, you know, to resell, to eat, to live. And when I went to Sioux Lookout, and it was in the middle of January or February, to visit with my sister, I was telling her about this situation, and she said, well, let's go wheel out to the Sioux Lookout dump. And sure enough, there was a dozen people living in the dump. And when we got there, there was people, you know, going through the refuse, trying to find, you know, whatever they could of value to survive off. This is in Canada. So I was in a developing country, you know, a low income country where there's extreme human rights abuses and people living in the garbage dump. And right here in Canada, people are doing the same thing. And this article from the Globe and Mail said that 13 people had died this winter. And 2 of them didn't have any, they were buried in unmarked graves because people didn't know who what their names were or where they were from. And that's the conditions that Indigenous people are living in communities across Canada. We have a high proportion of Indigenous people that are homeless and living in these kind of conditions. And when people live in garbage dumps in Canada, we know we've got a serious problem to deal with. And yeah, that's the
Okay.
issue of flipping affordable units and not providing enough funding for housing. Like, you know, all of these programs that disappeared in the 1980s and 1990s have left us in a terrible situation.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Jopin, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul.
Okay. I know there is many other people here who are representing from the town of St. Andrews, town of St. Stephen. We have a person here from St. Croix Valley Co-op, as well as the future St. Stephen. I would like to open it up for comments, and I'd like to ask these people if they would like to comment on what's they're doing or what the problems that they're having. Yeah, I would ask that you would raise your hand if you have any comments, or I could go and I believe yes. Bradley, would you be able to talk about what's happening in St. Andrews?
Yes, I certainly can. So first of all, Paul, David, I appreciate the comments today and the opportunity for us all to gather and talk about what we would call a housing crisis in our region. So the fact that we're all sitting around here and having these conversations are the key to making change. So in St. Andrews, there's a number of different factors, but what was evident is when I started on council almost 5 years ago, in our municipal plan, housing wasn't even listed as anything within our municipal plan. So if you look at a municipal plan and you're not keeping that top of mind, that's a serious flaw in a community plan. So with Alexander Goffin, who's on here, his help, we were able to renew our municipal plan, and housing has become a priority. One thing that St. Andrews is known for is it's got a lot of beautiful heritage homes with 1 acre lots that people, dream of retiring and owning. But the reality of St. Andrews is we actually do not have a diverse housing inventory. If you're looking for anything outside those 1 acre lot, beautiful homes, you're going to actually meet very, very large roadblocks. If you get into long-term rentals or even looking for your starter home, a lot of starter homes in the town of St. Andrews with the appraised value are around $300,000 now. And in New Brunswick, you can see that's very problematic to get ahead in the community. If you look at the town of St. Andrews, although population has been fairly steady over the last 5 years, according to the census, we've almost aged 5 years. So the amount of new people coming are not offsetting our age, quite frankly. So you're seeing people that come to the community, maybe be raised here, but to get their start, they're making the decision that they can't do it within our community. In particular, you look at the New Brunswick Community College, where we're trying to have students get educated. The reality is we don't have enough housing to meet the needs of the college. And what you're seeing is enrollment steadily declining over the last 10 years because there's not affordable places for them to live. We, as a community, you can look at things like short-term rentals and looking at regulating, bylaws like that. But to blame the problem on short-term rentals, I think that's very short-sighted. When you look at things like the appraisal values going up, you're looking at the double taxation. If you're an investor and you're looking to provide housing, affordable housing isn't attractive in our area, and it's that simple. The luxury apartments are what we're seeing that people are actually converting affordable housing into. I guess my question would be more for Mr. Kuhn, is wondering about making significant changes. If you look at the town plat of St. Andrews, it is very developed. There's very little opportunity. The town themselves do own land, but it's all outside of the town plat. So if you're a New Brunswick Community College student, to have to walk 4 kilometers to get to class and walk back, it's not feasible. But what we have within our community is government departments with surplus land, whether it be DTI, Department of Post-Secondary Education. These lots have been sitting vacant for decades. And that land is what we could actually use as a bargaining chip to get investors to come in and provide affordable housing in our community. To think that those vacant lots could actually become affordable housing to meet a major crisis for New Brunswick, plus bring in a little extra tax income, which is good again for New Brunswick. I don't see how these conversations aren't happening, where this surplus land can't be used to address this community crisis that we have.
That's brilliant. And it's not happening because there's no, like I said, we don't have MB Housing anymore doing that overall big picture and coordination and mandate to drive affordable housing. So, and this is exactly the kind of easy contribution the provincial government could make. So let's see if we can't pursue this with those departments. I think that's great, and I'd be happy to pursue that with the ministers that are relevant to those departments.
I'll have a letter to you this week.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you,
As
Brad.
long as you're not asking me about when your vaccination is going to come. Too many of those letters. Soon.
Yeah. Kendall, from St. Stephen, future St. Stephen, would you have a comment of what is going on with you?
I'd say in St. Stephen, we feel some of the same things that Brad's feeling over in St. Andrews for maybe slightly different reasons. They have international students is one of their things. We have people coming to work in manufacturing, and companies literally, St. George wrestles with this as well. We literally can't bring people here because there's nowhere for them to live.
Yes.
So we can't even fill existing jobs, and it's difficult. We face a lot of challenges. Same one that Brad speaks about is, can't even get access to land that's provincially owned is significant. Don't see the province really being a player for us. People talk about affordable housing. I think one of the things that's coming up for us and came out of the housing study is the focus on what we're terming workforce housing. So that's to say, people who aren't on social assistance, but also where rent levels are or entry to the housing market is just above where they're earning. And so what do we do to address that group of our demographic, right? Which is important. These are people holding jobs but struggling to pay their bills. And whether that's because of the energy poverty piece that's tipping them over the edge because, houses or apartments aren't efficient and there's not enough incentives for the landowners to kick that into place, or it's just not part of this whole strategy to see why would a developer be given an incentive potentially to meet this middle group that needs attention as well. It's not just people who are on assistance that we need to be looking out for in the market. So that's one thing that I think we're looking at and trying to get a handle on. For what we're doing, we're doing everything that we can. I would say we're the Service Commission in town are working with us to revise our zoning bylaw to make it more in line with kinds of developments that need to happen. We're working on revising our housing incentive policy to make it try and line up with our priorities, which would include affordable housing. We're putting together a developers package to say, okay, you might see this when you come to a larger municipality, but we're going to make it when you come here, you can also see what are the kinds of plots available, what's the data that we've gleaned from the housing study, what are the locations that it would be good to build certain kinds of units in town, and to just take as many barriers away as we can. We're trying to present ourselves as a community that has as few barriers as possible to developers that want to build here and do that. So I think those are some of the things that we're doing here to strive and say what are the total needs across the spectrum of our housing market, and what can we do in collaboration with partners to help try and address those all across the spectrum of housing, because we really do need so much.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are a few things. There's oodles of questions and challenges that we have in front of us to try and make that happen. But those are a few of the initiatives that we're trying to take on to move things forward here in our area.
One of the interesting things I noticed in the report was the mention of the number of seniors who are now living in their big old family homes by themselves, and there's a piece here which has to do with innovative seniors housing solutions, which would create kind of a better quality of life for seniors who are living alone and isolated in their own family homes, while then those larger homes being able to be turned into housing that could accommodate families or so on. So there's that piece of it too. I don't know the study didn't kind of quantify it, how significant it is, but it's certainly a piece. And I remember being approached by a group, Graham and Ann, a couple years back about this part of the problem. Seniors not really having many options in terms of where to live other than their family home, being isolated there, especially after they've lost their spouse. And of course, if we had better options for seniors like that, then as I said, those bigger old homes would be on the market, available.
Yeah, one of the pieces that's being looked at there, I mean, St. Andrews is looking at some of this to one extent, and we're looking at another to say, can you get an additional housing unit on your location, like on your PID? So that's one piece to look at, and another is changing the zoning areas and to say, can those older homes be divided up into 3 or 4 units, right? And to increase your housing density. And, you know, depending on the situation for a senior, you know, maybe they continue living in a portion of their home. There's other people that talk about co-housing, having younger people live with older people, and there's different examples of that can work well. Again, you almost need like a coordinator. And I think one of the things that I'm finding really challenging is even incentive enough for nonprofits or cooperatives to come to the table and to step up. Like I have a lot of private developers who are coming and wanting to talk to me because they're trying to find a way to crack the nut and make something work, right? Work for their community and work where they can make a bit of a profit off of it. But I'm just not seeing the whole ecosystem in New Brunswick set up where cooperatives are even really interested in coming to the table to come up with some of these creative solutions, you know, whether that's people, you know, wanting to, you know, some organization doing a pairing app, right? Or a pairing service that's going to pair seniors with younger people. You know, we have capacity for that, right? But that takes some technical work. What's the trust factor that lets someone, you know, allow another person to live into their home? You got to think through that. But I'm just not seeing a lot of pieces in place that create that appetite for the nonprofits to come to the table. So I think that's one of the challenges that I'm noticing here, or to see where's the blend. CMHC doesn't really allow a blend between nonprofit and private ownership, right? Can you have some blending there? We hear a lot of speak about that from government. Oh, we got to see public-private partnership, right? But when you really get down to the brass tacks, and there's concerns and relevant concerns, because I understand them, about not wanting to incentivize private industry, right? Unnecessarily. But I guess maybe I'm saying it sounds like that's where there's some more calls for better versions of doing things, and I'm just noticing them. I don't have the answers yet myself on what those are, but to see are some of those the ways that we knock down some of the barriers going forward.
Thank you, Kendall.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's much that can be done with housing. As I said, doing research into this, I did find that around North America, there's many different ideas for community housing, co-ops, co-housing, things that we can do, but there's a lot of restrictions and roadblocks that government is causing. So we have to talk about it and get the word out. As I say, right now, we're going to be entering into a municipal election in a couple of months. And this should be a municipal issue that should be brought up. We have other people here from different groups. I would ask if anybody else wants to make a comment.
I'll speak for the town of St. Stephen, if you don't mind.
Yes, Alan.
Yes, thank you. Like Mr. Kuhn was talking earlier about how municipalities should be getting involved, and then Paul mentioned that as well. One of the struggles that I have been seeing, and a lot of things were touched on before I got the chance to speak, but what Kendall was alluding to is one, getting the property, but lining up the property to help and give an incentive for a developer, but then you also have to line up the developer. But all the application process is too much that they don't want to be bothered with it, because they don't even know, because there's not enough money. They could be applying and not even get the money, so they're just going to put all their energy into something that's more sustainable or doable. So I like to see that all that red tape and all those avenues. Property, yes, the problems that's got property here. We just dealt with the situation here in St. Stephen, and I know the land in St. Andrews that Brad was alluding to by the trade school. Those things need to start happening. Those are easy. Those are easy things to happen. Like, it's just a sign here, sign. We're not asking the province for money, and all of a sudden the province can collect tax on this after we develop it. So that could incentivize the developer, because that would be our piece between the province and the municipality, and get some infrastructure in there to support it, and then we maybe give it a look at the developers excited and get in this rural area. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Wayne Dempsey, St. Croix Valley Co-op. Would you have any comments?
I will, if I can get myself unmuted here.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, good. It was being a little sticky up there. I couldn't see what was going on. Some interesting conversations going on there. The federal's national housing strategy. Bradley was mentioning surplus lands. Part of that national housing strategy on the federal level was the federal government making surplus federal land available. Okay, so if you have surplus federal land in your community, apparently there is a way that you can apply to have that released for development. Kendall and I were talking the latter part of 2020. We were looking at development for some of the funds that were available. I just didn't have the time to put together the appropriate proposal for that particular one. I started in the latter part of 2019 looking at some of the needs throughout the county, not just in St. Stephen. And I took a proposition to the board of directors at St. Croix Valley Housing. And then we took a presentation to the membership at a general membership meeting, proposing to seek funds to develop up to 300 housing units throughout Shelter County. And the membership was very much in favor of us going ahead and doing that. So I started the process, and then COVID-19 hit, which basically put me back to square one, and has had one foot nailed to the floor ever since. I really don't anticipate proceeding much further on that particular project until COVID-19 is finished. And my reasoning on that is the highly inflated cost for construction caused by COVID-19. The materials themselves, the cost factor has gone out of sight, but the construction costs in general has risen dramatically as well. The time it takes to complete a project has increased dramatically. That increases your costs as well. So being realistic, to create affordable housing, you need a subsidized mortgage or substantial grants. Once you have the project completed, what we have is a mixed income community. We have market rents and we have subsidized rents. And you need those subsidized rents for the people who are on income assistance and for the working poor, okay? I know people that hold down 2 and 3 low-paying jobs just so they don't have to go on welfare. And quite frankly, they would probably be better off financially if they did go on welfare, okay? But there's the pride issue there. So we can make allowances for that. So we are prepared to move ahead, but not while the pandemic is here, because I just can't see it happening.
Did you want me to answer the question about the federal lands?
Yes.
I don't know what the situation with federal lands is in New Brunswick. I know here, because we don't, in British Columbia, there was the Treaty 7 and Treaty 8 in northern BC, and then there was no other treaties. So if there are any federal lands in British Columbia, there is a claim on them. And that's the situation in my riding, that every piece of Crown land here has a claim on it. And that's because the whole southeast coast of Vancouver Island, 20% of the island, 8,000 square kilometers, was privatized to build the ENN land, the ENN Railway, the Esquimalt and Nanaimo Railway, as part of BC joining Confederation. So the coal baron that owned a good chunk of this town and owned the town of Ladysmith and Extension and Wellington, Robert Dunsmuir, was given all of this land to build a little railway that doesn't run anymore. And so First Nations here have, they won't negotiate private land for First Nations. So any federal land here is going to First Nations. But I haven't looked into that. And I mean, that's something to look into, whether the federal government would put federal lands into affordable housing or not. Maybe David might know.
David?
I don't know. I don't know that, but it would be good to get the answer. I know in Fredericton, they're moving out of the federal building into a new building, and that land. Anyway, well, so that's opens the question for me, whether they can provide that land or not. But they certainly have bits and pieces of land all over the place, just like the province does.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anybody else that would like to comment that's involved? I know there's a lot of people that are on the list that I do not know, and so if there's anybody else who would like to comment.
I did just find something on federal lands in CMHC, and I'm sharing the link right here in the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
How about that post office in Morris Mills? Is it closed yet?
Alan? Alan, what's the situation with the post office? Is that going to be available? Did Alan leave?
No, he's there.
He's there?
Which Alan you looking for?
Mayor Allen.
Yes. Well, that's out of my jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Morris Mills Post Office.
So is there any, as I said, if there's no comments, is there any questions that people would have to have for Paul Manley, David Coons, or one of the other speakers that have talked?
I have a comment and question. First off, in regards to the federal properties, in Oromocto, they have a nice base, CFP Gagetown. A lot of those housing units they took down, instead of running them to gear low-income people, were destroyed, folded, not destroyed, they were taken down in sections and rebuilt elsewhere. There's a lot of vacant land there that still can set up a building that would be used, but it's federal government property. And I don't think they're going to allow it. Even at the time I lived in Oromocto, it was strange, and I found it, that nobody could get in there, not even retired federal civil servants, just to save them a few bucks, because they didn't have much of a pension. My other thing is that I live on welfare, and I have lived on welfare for 6 years. So I make every dollar stretch, and every penny I pinch it. I just got my disability approved, so now I get $837 a month. Even though I could get more, they take my Canada pension plan off the check, which I don't think is right for them to deduct it, because it's a federal government source of money that I paid into most of my life while I was working. But they say it's, like, you got to do it. And I've applied for housing, but they don't seem too likely. The way I heard in their voice is that it's going to be hard for me to get public housing where I'm going to be turning 65 in November, in an area that I will feel safe and comfortable in, because I certainly don't want to go to the north side of Fredericton. I've lived over that way, and I get away from it as quickly as possible.
Well, there's Evelyn Grove.
What's that?
And there's Evelyn Grove in the south side of Fredericton, which is seniors.
Yeah, and my person who's my next to kin thinks I should go to Sussex. It's closer, it's nearer to him, and he goes to the same doctor, and I can also go to my specialist in Moncton much easier. But it's the waiting list to get up there, and it's horrendous. Even though I got disabilities, I'm on their disability plan, I'm still way down on the list. But I don't know if you know about that property there, Paul, in Oromocto. And David, I don't know if there's anything that could be done to improve the situation for somebody like myself.
I don't know that property. I don't know New Brunswick well at all. I've been there, toured through on showing films when I was a filmmaker, but I don't know. And I've done some shoots in New Brunswick, but I haven't spent a lot of time there. I'd like to spend more time there. It's beautiful.
Yes.
The CMHC site said there are currently no properties available under the federal lands program.
There's nothing there. They put in a dog park.
Yes.
They put in a dog park. That's all they put in there. And then you have to be careful too, because it's not blocked on all ends, and your dog could run out in the highway and get hit by a car.
Yes. David, do you have any? David, do you
I do have to
any
leave in a couple of minutes, so if there's
Yeah.
any other questions for me, then I'd happily take them, but otherwise I do need to bail out. So
Okay, well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, for coming. And
thank you so much for having me.
And I hope you enjoy that nice weather that you're having out in New Brunswick. We're having presently here at my home, it's windy and cold. I don't know how it is out there.
That's about 6 degrees and cloudy.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
we'll
be back for rain soon.
We're about the same. Anyway, so
All
thank
right,
you,
well,
Paul.
thank you so much. Okay, take care.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Paul.
Okay. So as I said, it's been an hour and a half. I was wondering if there's.
Actually, John,
Yes.
I think Brianna has a comment she'd like to share. She's been trying to get in there for a while.
Okay, Brianna. Yes.
I can.
I haven't talked to you, Brianna. You're with Eastern Waterways.
Charlotte Waterways, that's correct. Thanks so much, John, for putting this on. You've done a wonderful job hosting it. We really appreciate you. taking the time to gather everyone and together. I had a question, and it's more around it's sort of shifted towards an opportunity-based question. So, this really builds off of what Kendall and Alan was saying before. We have capacity within this region, especially in form of other nonprofits and individuals who do want to see nonprofit and cooperative housing being developed. However, we have an issue, and that very much is related to the fact that we don't have the necessary capacity to pursue the funding through CMHC. And a lot like Alan and Kendall were saying before, the groups that do want to do that are often deterred by the amount of work and resources it takes to sort of create those applications. And then of course, maybe the expectation that maybe it won't be awarded to them. So I guess my question is more directed towards you, David. We know that Fredericton and St. John, especially with Kit Hickey at Housing Alternative Inc., she's a wonderful resource, has a lot of capacity to assist nonprofits and cooperative housing developers to do work, but how do we make it so that we can acquire that expertise in our region, and we can work together to build hospitals, well, not build hospitals, but like you were saying before, around our regional capacity to build, and how do we do it so we can get affordable housing as well?
Yeah, well, actually, that makes me think it'd be good to, and I'll do this, have a conversation with the New Brunswick nonprofit and see what kind of outreach they do, because I don't know. I'll ask and find out, because they're the logical ones to do that. They've got the knowledge, experience, and of course the exposure to their province-wide membership and their various initiatives different members have undertaken. So they would be the logical ones. But let me see what kind of outreach they do.
Okay, thank you, Brianna. To say, if you have, if you want to say something, you can raise your hand. If you click on participants, you'll there's a button there to raise your hand if you want to speak. And I just want to take a moment to have a call out to Kimberly Reeder, who's joined us tonight. She was our Green candidate in the last provincial election, and we thank her for running. And I would also like to call out our two young people who put their names forward as a candidate for the federal election, Matthew Gracie and Perry Collinval. These are two young people that I believe they both studied at St. Stephen St. Thomas University, and they're wanting to put their names forward for the election, and hopefully we will see them in the future.
That's awesome.
So again,
you know how big the riding is, right?
Yes. Well, the riding of Southwest New Brunswick is huge. Going from St. Stephen up towards Fredericton, just along the St. John River, this side of St. John River, and all the way up to Sussex. So it is a big territory, and I love the fact that there is Zoom, so we can all be able to go and talk, because I know there are people that are on here from the Fredericton and Hanwell and the Sussex area. And as I say, on a normal meeting, we couldn't go and do that if we were meeting in a hall. We wouldn't be able to attract people from all over. So thank you all for coming. Again, I would ask if there is any other comments or any questions that you would have for David or any of the other participants.
Alan's got his hand up there. Is that
Alan?
you, Alan?
Alan?
Yes, thank you. I just want to learn a little bit something here. Wayne Dempsey, you mentioned earlier about how COVID affects your development. Could you explain that? Is it because of the cost of materials, or is it contractors, or what was the reasoning for the COVID? If there's something I could do with that, I'd like to know.
It comes down to the total cost of everything. 2x4s.
Yeah.
If you've been out to a lumber yard recently,
Oh, I have.
a dramatic increase. Okay, on one or two, that really doesn't make a lot of difference. Okay, you can bite the bullet on it. But when you're using thousands of them to build housing, it makes quite a difference.
Okay, so it's mostly the cost of material.
Yeah. With the social distancing restrictions in place, where you could have several sub-trades working on site before and moving things along rapidly to get a project completed, you can only have one sub-trade working at a time on a site, and in some instances, one in a room or in a building. Okay, so it drastically reduces the amount of people you have working, which dramatically increases the amount of time and again the cost. So it's to keep it affordable. Okay, you have to be able to reduce the amount that it costs. Okay. And as I said before, it was either through a subsidized mortgage or with whatever amount of grants that you can get, because what is left over, the mortgage that you have to be paying on monthly, okay, that becomes part of your operating budget. The next big thing on that is going to be your property taxes, and then they sort of diminish down from there. With a housing cooperative, they are not profit driven, they're cost driven. Okay, so we can generally keep rents considerably lower than local markets. Okay, but again, in order to be able to do that, we have to be able to keep the costs down.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the tax thing. How are we with that now? Is that going to, that was on the table up there, wasn't it, Mr. Kuhn? And did it get tabled, or did they?
They took it off the table. They took it off the table when COVID hit and the revenue started to dry up.
What is that, the property tax?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we lobbied the provincial government for decades to get rid of the provincial portion of the property tax, which eventually it did happen. There was some confusion in that. The people at the provincial level thought that we were asking to have property tax eliminated, and that's not what we were after at all. We were after eliminating the provincial portion of the property tax, which basically is they take the municipal tax and double it, and that's what they collect. Well, we don't get any services from the provincial government. We get services from our municipalities. So we don't mind paying our property taxes for that. But we were getting absolutely nothing from the provincial government. And once we got that through to a few of the heads up there in Fredericton, they agreed with us. And it finally changed in, I think it was February 2005.
I'm going to take advantage of the silence here for a second. That's a,
Yes.
I think it's an $80 million question, is the loss the government would see.
Yes.
But if they could just see the potential of the growth right now, we have a prime opportunity right now with people coming here. We're missing on opportunities on hotels, that just won't develop here because they will develop in PEI and all around us, but they're not developing here. It would probably make up the $80 million, or no, probably I would assume it would.
I mean, there's no reason for the provincial government to be double taxing anybody, whether it's hotels or private landlords or whatever. I mean, there's just no reason for it. If you eliminate that double tax, okay, that will promote new construction. The new construction will start to offset that so-called perceived loss.
Thank you. David, is there something that can be done with the double tax?
Well, not until we get clear of COVID. I don't think they're going to look at anything that's going to take a significant bite out of revenue. That's my read on it for sure.
Perry, you have your hand up.
I don't know if Matthew also goes through or went through this as a student, but I find that for students, especially since we only have the dorms, they always promote us getting apartments and everything. Whereas universities in Europe, where I also have like applied, it's more like the apartments that you share with like other students, not as dorms, but also other people live there, they're low income. I wonder, why is that not more promoted? This could just be just because we don't have the land, but I find that it's more promoted when you apply to look for housing like that, where you share it with refugees, immigrants. And I find that here it's not really talked about as much. It's more like you just find an apartment to move out of the dorm and that's kind of it. You're left on your own. So I was wondering if that's like, if there's something that can be done about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, and that's, I guess it's part of the cultural difference, but like St. Thomas has off-campus housing. I wonder if that would be a place to try and, it would take some organization to sort it out, but I guess there's good examples in other places, as you say, but that would be an interesting project for off-campus housing to pursue, help facilitate that for students.
Kendall, you discussed that with me the other day for student housing.
Which piece? We talked for a while.
Oh, not Kendall. Bradley. Yes, I'm getting people confused. Brad.
Yes. Sorry, what was the question?
Perry was asking about student housing, and you talked about student housing when we talked today.
Yeah, so we have a major shortage. If you look at the New Brunswick Community College, when it's fully rolling, I think they'd like to have 300 students, but we're a town of 1,800 people, which means that we have a lot less homes than that. You're looking at 600 to 700 homes, and to have apartments for that many students, obviously there's a shortage. As part of the NBCC's 5-year plan, one of the things that they alluded to is that the opportunity to reverse enrollment decline was actually international students. And when you look at New Brunswick and talking about opportunities for growth, immigration is their primary foundation of how we are going to reverse our own population and workforce challenges. So you got to think that a town that isn't able to meet the needs of international students that are looking for a place to become educated, the jobs that you can get in New Brunswick, I just don't see how we're not figuring this out. But St. Andrews does not have a dorm, and what I understand from the NBCC 5-year plan is most of their students aren't actually looking for dorms; they're looking for individual housing units. So to say that there's not a crisis in town, there absolutely is. I talked to a young New Brunswick Community College student that when school started in September, they had, I think, 18 people in their class. And then 2 weeks later, they had 12 because 6 people had relocated from St. Andrews to Moncton to go to school because we couldn't meet the housing needs for them. So, yes. You can't help but be frustrated. I guess just to show the exact need is I work at Kingsbury Garden as my day job. And Andrew Sutton, who's on here, actually helped cover it when he was with the Courier. we purchased a 10-unit apartment building to convert it into affordable housing. And that 10-unit building, we actually went across Ontario and tried to recruit the top culinary students from these universities and colleges. And they were almost all willing to come here, because the question they always ask is, I'll come, but where do I stay? And we never had an answer until now. And we filled those 10 units. But where I'm going with this is those 10 units we don't advertise to the public. And we get over 100 requests a year from people that are calling us to see if we have a vacancy for affordable housing. So here we are in this little town of St. Andrews with that much demand, and I'm sure in St. Stephen it's even higher. If we could just build these things, people will come. Like, young people will move to New Brunswick for opportunity. It's an exciting spot to live. And just to piggyback off Mayor McEachran's comments on New Brunswick right now is, I don't think that New Brunswick's got a better opportunity than it does right now. We actually, for the first time ever, have some momentum. If you look at our housing, our growth of sales, I think New Brunswick was #2 in the whole country. I think it's up 22%. Like, we have an opportunity to react now to grab some of this momentum. We just need to do something bold versus not do anything at all. And I'm kind of frustrated myself because, like I said, it's my 5th year on council. And I think I waited too long to not push as hard as I have been the last few months. But I guess that'd be incentive for me to consider reoffering if I'm successful enough to get in. But again, I appreciate all the time for everybody this evening.
Thank you, Bradley. Perry, you have your hand up again?
I just wanted to go off of what Brad said. For example, like, I lived abroad for a couple of years, and then I actually moved back to New Brunswick because I knew that there was more potential here than living in Europe regarding school and also working, since the job industry is really bad there. But I find that also, like, a lot of international students also struggle, and people are attracted to coming to New Brunswick, even in rural communities. There just has to be more affordable housing, better public transportation, because usually where people come from, I rode a bike everywhere. I took the bus or a train, and it's very hard here not to own a car. So, like, the reason, like, I have a place out in Harvey, but I live right now in Fredericton because of school. If I didn't have my car, I could not go and check up on it because there's basically no public transportation. So with better housing and better public transportation system, New Brunswick has so much more potential. And I just wish that we could, like, do something about it to, like, make it better like that.
Well, and we can, absolutely. One of the things I think that could help maybe to turn housing a little bit around is the provincial government's concern about not having sufficient housing for the immigrants that they want to attract, and that then would require them to pull together a group focused on housing. And so, for the first time since we lost the MB Housing as a real entity, we would have a group devoted to thinking about housing and how to advance affordable housing, and so that might be the catalyst for government to actually start to bear down and pay some attention to this in a constructive way that's going to enable them to have the capacity to work with communities to understand the needs and see if we can't move things forward. But institutionally, there needs to be a group in Fredericton who's focused on that, to really engage the province in this. That's my interpretation, anyways, from being in Fredericton here.
Bradley Small from Grand Manan, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question or may have a comment?
You're on mute, Brad.
Bradley, yeah.
I'd make a joke, but I won't.
You're still muted.
That's all. The last tap is always the best tap. So.
Yes. Bradley.
Unmute.
There you
go.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I'm new to this. So
Yes.
one of the things after listening to this, apparently, like, obviously in St. Stephen, it sounds like there's more jobs than houses. I expect, and
Yes.
it seems that way, all over the place. What would be the chances of partnering with some of these employers to get some of the housing? I'll give you on the island, during lobster fishing, we have an influx of people for a month, 2 months, and recently there's been a couple of private companies. One guy bought a church and renovated it and into apartments. He also he's bought to rent to lease or rent to own the property right next door to me. They fixed it up, and so I guess it's livable. And there's a young family living that, eventually, apparently, my understanding, they're renting to own it. There's another fishing company bought the old town hall in North Head, where we all went to court sometime or other. And they converted that into, like, I guess that's a dormitory, for their workers. Now I'm wondering with like, say, cooks or ganongs or whoever the big employers are, why if they're why they can't be tapped to if they could be tapped to build housing for some of their workers, and that wouldn't that free up, in theory, free up some of the housing and alleviate some of the stress, or would it? Maybe that's, maybe I'm thinking about it wrong.
I'll speak to that a little bit. I think that's something that is starting to be considered. So some of the employers are starting to look at those options because they're just in desperation. They're hesitant because they're saying this isn't normally what we do, right? This isn't the focus of our operations. We may not do it well, but if we have to, we might. I think historically we might want to look to and to say, are those always the best relationships that exist, where the employer controls your job and controls your housing? There are a lot of problematic histories of that, so it would have to be set up.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, Black's Harbor went through, through that. Yeah. But if you got a job, if you got a job and you got a house, at least,
so there's
at least you're not underneath the bridge.
So there's pieces of that. So anyways, I think there's some caution about stepping into that. I do know that ONB ran a survey to major employers across the province, because it's this is across the province, and they did that before Christmas, and they released the results of that recently, and they were looking to see which employers are needing housing badly, are looking at providing their own housing currently. And so they're trying to work with that and to say what, I think they're trying to use that information to see what should part of the provincial response be as a result. Do they work with employers, or do they work with communities, or do they work with nonprofits? Where do you put the pieces in place? I'm encouraged that they're looking at it. But I think, there are some questions about what's the good way to do that, and some employers are looking at it already on their own, because they say we can't even wait anymore. Whether or not we think it's a good idea, we won't be able to operate if we don't get housing in place for our employees.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, obviously there's going to be some employers are going to be more ethical than others, but it's when you've got like Mr. Manley was saying, if you've got people that are literally living in the dumps to get by, I don't think I hope that that's not happening here, but it could be. I mean, most people are just a paycheck or two from being out in the cold. And if, obviously it's a problem. And like Mr. Dempsey was saying, the price of lumber, I mean, is astronomical. Tackling, nonprofit housing. It's kind of, it's kind of prohibitive right now.
Yes. Thank you, Bradley. Yeah, you bring up a good comment, because as I say, I've looked into the history of the area, and I've seen the Ganons and the fish plants and cooks way back 100 years ago. They had housing for their workers. There would be people coming from all across the country to work in the fish plants, but now we don't have that. So maybe we have to return. Andrew Sutton, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question for David, but I also have a bit of a comment on what Bradley was saying. Some of the companies in Charlotte County do provide worker housing, but it's for workers who are new immigrants, and that's usually an arrangement that they have with the workers in order to get them here, because and usually those are jobs that they can't fill locally. But that's the extent that I've heard about it in Charlotte County. David, that was a few months ago. There was an article in the CBC where Bruce Fitch, wearing one of his many minister hats, in this case as Minister of Social Development, said that government should be the last resort when it comes to affordable housing. And I recall you being fairly critical of that at the time. So my question to you is, how do I get Bruce Fitch to sit down for an interview?
Go to Riverview, meet him where he lives.
Yeah, good answer.
I'm serious.
I'll try that. I might. Yeah. Okay. Good. Go to Riverview. Vicky, you want to take a trip to Riverview? Great.
Andrew and Vicky, I'd like to thank you for coming, because Vicky and Andrew, they're both from CHCO TV, and I hope you would give some comments on their the newscast.
I hear Vicky asking questions all the time on the COVID briefings. You do a great job.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
As well as we have a reporter on here from Brunswick News, I know. So we can get, I hope we can get the message out.
I could use, before we wrap up, Brianna, if you could send me your email so I can get back to you on your Brunswick nonprofit housing.
I will say just quickly that Andrew did a full half-hour show on the Southwest Service Commission's report that's been airing on CHCO for a while now. That's really worth checking out if you haven't seen it. You can find it on our YouTube and our Facebook page if you don't see it on television.
It was a great interview with. So I'd like to go. We've been here for 2 hours, and unless anybody has really any comments, I would like to go and end the meeting. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and keep the conversation going. I love what people have said about what's going on in the different communities. And as I say, we need to make this a municipal issue with the election coming up in May. So thank you, everyone. And I hope to meet you all again when the things get better. We can meet in person. So thank you, and good night.
Thank you, John. And I'll just say to the two people who are seeking the nomination for the candidacy for New Brunswick Southwest, whoever is ends up being the candidate, and your team, maybe hopefully you'll work together. I'd be happy to chat with you about the election and share what I could from the provincial experience, anyways, of campaigning in some of those areas with our other candidates. So look me up.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
So you two, you heard that. So again, I'd like to thank you all. And if you have any questions or want to discuss things, please email me, or if you want to share your emails with somebody else, or you'd let me know. So thank you again, and I'd like to end the meeting. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.